start off with Liverpool and the situation surrounding Mo Salah. Obviously, his future is very uncertain at this moment in time following his comments after the Leeds game. What did you make of what he had to say and how kind of Liverpool have responded to the situation?
I just think it's unnecessary, to be honest. He's not played well. And he's on the bench. I mean, it's not that big a deal. Even the games where he wasn't brought on, they weren't particularly suited for attacking players to come on, and one that probably doesn't retain the ball as well as some other players. So I think it's very, very ill-judged, but you have to assume he wants to leave. So we know what footballers do when they want to leave a football club. They try and make it as unpalatable for the selling club as possible, reduces the price for the buying club, which therefore leaves more money in the economics for the player themselves. And I suspect that's what's going on here. I think he almost certainly will end up in Saudi Arabia during January. I think, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't think it's a bad outcome for Liverpool, because yes, of course, it's Mo Salah and he's been an amazing player for them for 8 years or whatever it is. But they were probably borderline in the summer as to whether to give him the contract or whether just to call it quits. A similar way to City and Kevin De Bruyne probably, although Salah has looked in better shape maybe than Kevin De Bruyne, and therefore there was that belief that he could do another couple of years. But I suspect they always worked on the basis that maybe he'd do 1 year and then they'd sell him. So this is only bringing it forward perhaps 6 months. And so I think where Liverpool may end up is a deal where, okay, it's not worked for the first 6 months of the season, it's been expensive, it's probably cost them maybe 15 million quid, maybe more for this first half of the season, which hasn't really worked out. But it'll probably go and they'll get, I don't know, quite a sizable fee, probably in excess of £50 million, probably, which is not a bad outcome, on a purely business sense. And everybody will move on, and Liverpool's rebuild, to the extent that's what it is, will continue. And I think for the player, it seems to me to be similar to Yaya Toure and Manchester City. Okay, Toure maybe wasn't quite at Salah's level, but he was certainly a massive player. Won multiple trophies, had a fantastic relationship, or the fans loved the player, and then they set fire to it on the way out. It's just, I don't know, it seems they're badly advised. They probably regret it, but they'll end up with a move that suits all parties in the end.
It's also been linked with San Diego FC, obviously, in the MLS. Do you think it's maybe a bit of a stretch for a club like that to sign him?
Yeah, I don't. I think it's almost zero chance, and definitely zero chance in January. So just too expensive, when you've got Saudi in the background. Look, if Saudi weren't there, so let's say Saudi say, actually, we're not in that game anymore. Then obviously there's very few other options. So yes, then the US would come into it, but not in this scenario, and not on the sort of money that Salah wants.
Of course. And then, away from the football side of things, there's a bit of a report in the Financial Times that US private capital group KKR is in talks to acquire Liverpool minority investor Arctos Partners. So how directly would a deal like that impact the club, really?
Well, it wouldn't. I mean, we are in a slightly odd world now where the mergers and acquisitions of funds that have small stakes in football clubs becomes football news. I mean, I know it plays into kind of a lot of the analysis and sweet spot that I talk about, but it is kind of ridiculous that we're talking about KKR and Arctos and Redbird we've talked about previously. It's all irrelevant to Liverpool. Liverpool are well funded. If they have another funding round, they'll be able to either go to the existing shareholders, including whether it's KKR heading it or Arctos, or someone new. It doesn't really matter. They'll be able to find access to capital if that's what's required. And in any event, they're probably not looking in that sort of world at the moment, in terms of raising more equity. So it won't impact Liverpool at all.
Of course. And then moving on to Man City, it looks now like Phil Foden's closing on signing a new contract at the Etihad. So will he be one of the top earners, do you think, once he's got a new deal over the line?
Yeah, I mean, I suspect he earns very well right now. So I would think he's probably could be top 5 already. So I think that'll just solidify his position within that hierarchy. It's critical when he's playing back to this sort of level that he's re-signed, and I'm sure that will happen.
And then in terms of potential recruits, Man City have apparently sent scouts to watch Adam Wharton lately at Crystal Palace. So is that one transfer you may think would be next summer rather than immediately, given the prices involved with that?
Well, they watched him for a while. I mean, it's not the first time. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in January. I think City will have to be quite restrained in January. I think they're getting to the point where they're going to, unless they're selling, unless they've got some, and they do have options to sell, the players that could have gone last summer, Lewis, Savino in particular, and you'd probably now add Bob to that list. And if they also could get, there are players I think they would like to move on if they could, if there was big money available. But before those players are sold, I just don't think City are in a position to do multiple deals, and certainly not, every other deal's £100 million deal these days. So I don't think they're in a position to do one of those deals, certainly not in January. They've added a lot, just in terms of the financial fair play tests. Obviously you've now got 5 different tests if you add them all together, because you've got all of the UEFA tests, they're all different periods of time. Then you've got on top of that the PSR, final year of PSR in the Premier League. Then you've also got SCR coming in next season. So you've just got to be mindful of all these things, and they all work differently. But City is starting to build up a very, very high level of player amortisation, which is now in the region, same sort of ballpark as Chelsea and Manchester United and Liverpool. But also they've got extremely high wage bill, and we'll see when the accounts come out for the year ended June 25. We'll see where the wage bill ended last season, but it's likely, again, it's well over 400 million quid, and at some point it needs to be addressed, and players, it's getting very high if they're not winning on the pitch. Now, clearly, if you're winning everything, it's different, but if you're not winning everything, you've got to be careful of the wage bill, and then you've got to be careful when you bring in additional players on top of it. So, I don't, long answer, I think, feels to me that someone like Semenyo is the only realistic deal for a number of clubs in January of that size, that major sort of signing, just because he's got the release clause. I mean, maybe we'll find out Adam Wharton's got a release clause. If that's the case, then of course, these deals are doable. You might accelerate them, you might take a decision to do it, but in the absence of that, I don't think Wharton can move in January.
Of course. And then at Chelsea, their disciplinary hearing over the 74 charges that include secret payments to agents during the Abramovich era is due to end this week. So what do you think the likely punishment is if that really does go against them in this kind of worst case scenario?
Look, they brief very heavily that they don't expect a points deduction or a sporting sanction. That they say we've admitted everything, and therefore we should just get a financial penalty. A financial penalty would be no penalty at all, because it will all be paid by the previous owners, and everybody carries on as if nothing's happened. Now, the problem with that is, first of all, Chelsea have admitted everything. So what tends to happen in these situations, or what has happened, is the disciplinary hearing is not really a hearing on liability. i.e. whether they did it or not. That's established, they did it. The hearing becomes a sanction hearing, which is you tell us what the mitigating factors are, and the FA will argue what the aggravating factors are and will allow the panel then to come up with a punishment. Now, it's very hard, in my view, to see how the FA do not say that Chelsea, via these payments, achieved a sporting advantage. And they did that by acquiring players that other teams wanted to buy. And some of the biggest players in Chelsea's recent history are included in this case. You know, the Hazards and players of that type. Now, if that argument is successful for the FA, that Chelsea have had a sporting advantage over a number of seasons, that usually leads to a sporting penalty. A sporting penalty is points deductions. So you'd then say, well, okay, they admitted it all, they notified us, we'd never have known about it if it wasn't for Chelsea self-reporting, blah, blah, blah. And all of that is very good mitigation, no question. And it will be very much in their favour. But what usually happens in that scenario is that they get a reduction of, let's say, 30% of the sanction. So, you know, they come up with, for the sake of discussion, they come up with you've got to have a 6-point penalty, 30% reduction. Okay, well, we'll take 2 points off that. You've got a 4-point deduction. That's typically how these things have worked. For Chelsea to get no sporting penalty at all, I don't know, seems to me quite difficult to see how that works. Quite difficult to understand why the FA would not say, in their pushing for whatever they're wanting as the penalty, seems to me quite hard to understand why the FA wouldn't say this is sporting advantage. It seems to me to be absolutely a sporting advantage situation. But as I say, Chelsea is saying, briefing, you know, all around that they don't expect a sporting sanction, and if there was, they would appeal. But that's kind of beside the point. I mean, you know, so they appeal, big deal. It won't change the likely position that's been established on sporting advantage if they've got a sporting sanction. So that's going to be the nub of it. You know, do people think that paying agents secret payments that swayed a player from one club to another, do people think, or does the panel think, that gave them a sporting advantage? As I say, to me, it seems pretty obvious that yes, it gave them a sporting advantage. But let's see what the argument is. It'll be interesting to read the decision if we ever see it, the award, the details of what they did, how they argued it, and everything else. That'll take some time to come out, and once it does, then we'll be able to analyse it again. But those are the parameters. So, is it sporting advantage? If so, what's the points deduction? Headline. Then, what are the mitigating factors that Chelsea can argue, and what's that worth in terms of a discount?
Of course. And then, in terms of transfers, Chelsea are reportedly not planning to sign any players in January. Is there any financial reason behind why that could be the case, or is it maybe not believable given how many players they have signed in recent years?
Yeah, well, look, I wouldn't rule it out because Chelsea don't do things in a conventional way. But let's be clear, they've been right up at the boundaries of most of these tests. They've only got through them, as we know, with some extraordinary transactions. They've got to be mindful of what's coming down the line in terms of squad cost ratios, which will limit the number of options that they have for how they can comply. They have a huge amortization amount in that calculation that they can't easily deal with. They will be more limited in terms of what they can do on transfers out, because clearly if you sell loads and loads of players, you have less to sell where you can make a profit. They've got a potential impairment issue coming down the line with Mudryk, so that could easily end up costing them, within these calculations, £50 million on impairment, which means that, i.e. you take his value as it is now and you reduce it for what his actual value is, i.e. zero. So that's a potential issue as well. They may well have other impairment issues, people like Raheem Sterling, although I can't remember if he's had a contract this summer or summer after. So issue there. They've got a very high wage bill. Anyway, all of that together means that it's not a surprise that they will be limited in January, because they're also under a UEFA settlement agreement where they've got to move towards complying with the UEFA rules. So none of it's a surprise, but likewise, I wouldn't rule, Chelsea are the kind of club where if they opportunistically see something, it wouldn't surprise me if they pounced.
Of course. In terms of the UEFA rules, obviously Crystal Palace failed to comply with the multi-club rules around their ownership with John Textor last year. Obviously, he ended up selling his stake, but they didn't end up playing in the Europa League because of them. Apparently now, UEFA has confirmed that clubs must comply with the multi-club rules by 1st of March. So do any Premier League sides really need to take immediate action around this and get their kind of house in order in the next couple of months or so?
Yeah, look, there are clubs all over Europe that are it's a real issue for them, because if you read, so we now have for the first time in the last week, we've got all three of the cases that were played out at CAS, clubs appealing against bans from the tournament due to MCO. And so you got a good understanding now of the parameters around what happened and who was allowed and who's not. Now, the interesting thing is, a lot of the stuff that we heard before about Nottingham Forest, for example, not complying by the 1st of March, but still being okay, I think it's pretty clear that Nottingham Forest would not have been allowed to play if Olympiacos would have been in the same competition. They would have been relegated out of, let's say, the Champions League, right? Because as far as we can tell, all of their actions in terms of the blind trust were all post the 1st of March. And it appears now that although there were some indications that UEFA would have been lenient, actually the reality was that there was no decision from UEFA that they would actually be lenient. So the ECA, who are the European Club Association, they went off and said, oh yeah, don't worry about it, to all its clubs. But actually it looks like the reality is that UEFA gave no leniency to anybody at all. And nobody that was challenging any of these cases, Crystal Palace, Drogheda and these other clubs, nobody could point to a situation where they had been lenient and allowed teams to go over the 1st of March. It was all found to be legal, so that's the other thing. It was all found to be proportionate, that's the other thing. Top and bottom of it is, now, you have to do stuff by the 1st of March. There's no question now, in my view, from those three cases. You will have to comply by the 1st of March. There won't be any leeway. And it's not even clear if blind trusts work, because there's a lot of noise around blind trusts being only a exceptional situation for use in the 23-24 season, I think it was. It might have been 24-25. But whenever City and United did it with Girona and Nice, that was once... the rules were different in terms of the dates then, but whenever they did it, that's now seen as an exceptional situation. So it's not clear that blind trust works. Now that means, okay, well, we've got a situation where Everton and Roma need to think about it. Crystal Palace, they're no longer in the multi-club with Lyon, but they are in a multi-club with Blitzer and Harris's teams, and therefore they need to think about it from that perspective. Clearly, City and Girona, if there's any risk at all of that situation, although I think Girona are too far down the league table. Manchester United and Nice, again, probably not an issue. Chelsea, Strasbourg, big problem, right? Because, I don't know, I haven't checked the league table, but Strasbourg tend to do quite well. Let's have a quick look. Bottom line is, they got a problem that they got to sort out, because they're not going to want to risk. Like, there was a situation last season where Chelsea went in the Champions League and they qualified via finishing 5th or 4th. If Strasbourg would have qualified last season from Ligue 1, they would have taken, I think, they would have taken Chelsea's place. And Chelsea would have been relegated into the Europa League, because on the league table, Strasbourg would have finished higher up than Chelsea, and they would have therefore taken precedence. Now, they lost the last 2 games and didn't qualify, so it wasn't a problem in the end. But Chelsea hadn't taken any actions to sort the situation out. Now, if you look at what's happening in Ligue 1, maybe Strasbourg this season won't do it. They've lost 4 out of the last 5. They're 2 points off 5th, but they're quite a long way behind the next bunch up. So you know they're going to struggle, I think, probably, to qualify for the Champions League, and therefore maybe Chelsea are relaxed about it. But of course, that does assume Chelsea get into the Champions League and not the Europa. I mean, again, if both clubs got into the Europa and one finished higher than the other in doing so, you can end up in a situation where Chelsea get relegated to the Conference League unless they take action before the 1st of March. So I think a number of clubs in the Premier League who have got any sort of MCO relationships, and by the way, the interpretation of multi-club is now deemed to be expansive rather than sort of a tight analysis of what multi-club means, so that they're going to try and capture more and more of the clubs with almost, any connection. So it's a big issue for loads of clubs, and they're going to have to get busy now. They're going to have to be liaising with UEFA right now. I've already reached out to various clubs to see if they want those discussions as to how it could be approached. But it's urgent, and they've got limited time to sort it out. Otherwise, they can expect to have more of these sort of relegations into lower tournaments or complete bans. It will happen.